Welcome to the Our Veterans, Our Stories podcast with the Hancock County Veterans Service Office. This is where we give our local veterans an opportunity to share their stories with our community and beyond. There is a real brotherhood among all vets, and it will be great to help others to know their stories about serving our country. And it gives us an opportunity to introduce the community to our team at the Hancock County Veterans Service Office so people can learn a little bit more about what we do and how we can help. Well, welcome to today's podcast. Today we have the opportunity to interview Laurence Lauer, also known as Sliv. It's kind of an interesting story. Nicole and I were at the office last Friday, and in walks this young man, Sliv, and he's asking if we could help him retrieve some paperwork of his that he needs for some business he's doing. And we were able to help him there, and in the process we got to talking to Sliv a little bit and found out that he's quite the amazing veteran, and so we're taking this opportunity to hear his story today. How are you doing this morning, Sliv?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned, you're a very accomplished veteran. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into about your history with the military a little bit.
Well, I was born and raised in Van Buren and grew up with 6 kids, and I graduated from high school. I played some sports, and then I was drafted in the Marine Corps, and that's about the start of that.
I gotcha. Yeah. Also with us today is Ron Ammons. Ron is very versed in the history of all types of veterans and veteran things, and he knows Sliv very well. So Ron will be a big help here in our interview with Sliv. So Ron, what do you think of Sliv?
I think he's a great man. He's the citizen soldier you always hear about in World War II, where you take a guy who steps out of high school and he's wants to get a job in the community, and he gets drafted, and next thing you know, he's goes from the farm to the battlefield, and comes back and becomes a citizen again, working for Collingwood Motors and known around town as a regular guy. But like a lot of those World War II veterans, was very humble about it, and his story has really only come out recently. So I'm glad that Ed, you and your crew invited Sliv to come in here.
That's great. So Sliv, what made you want to serve your country?
Well, I had 2 brothers that was in, and one in the Navy, and then I had a brother that was in the Army, and he got wounded over on the French German border. He had a shell went off, and he dove for a foxhole and anyway, he got his head and his one arm in, and it blasted him and took his leg and his one arm and a big chunk, and had 2 big gashes in his stomach. And he was taken to hospital in Italy, and they tried to save his leg, and they went and put a cast on it, and gangrene set in, so they had to take his leg off, quarter to hip. And so being my mother had 2 in the service, that's in fact the reason that I didn't join. I wanted to join, but my mother said, well, I've got 2 children in here already, and so she said, so anyway, that's the way I waited till I was drafted.
You were drafted and became a Marine.
Yeah.
Was there a choice? Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
I went up to Toledo from the draft ward here. Went up to Toledo, took us up the bus to the Armory in Toledo for our physical, and they picked 4 of us out that they said was the most physically fit. And they put us on a train to Cleveland that night, and I thought I was going to come back home, and put up in the hotel there, and the next day I was sworn in the Marine Corps, put in a train, and ended up in San Diego, California So you know, at the
Just like that.
yeah. And my folks didn't even know where I was at. That was it. You know, they.
Oh wow! How long was it before you had a chance to contact your parents and let them know what was going on?
I wrote them a letter afterwards. After I got to, in San Diego.
I see.
Yeah, they didn't know where I was. You know where I was at. And,
wow. So Sliv, when you found out you were getting drafted and going into the Marine Corps, how old were you at that time?
Just ready to turn 19.
You're 18, ready to turn 19. What kind of impact did that have on you, being 18 years old and such a heavy weight kind of?
Well, no, you know, I mean, everybody knew at the time. I mean, when you got out of school, because everybody was going into service, so you knew what your future was the first couple of years, after you got out of school, because I mean, anybody that had a warm body was almost drafted, So oh no, I knew right when I was in high school, because see, I was a sophomore, I believe, when Pearl Harbor was hit, and so and then they just started drafting. Of course, like I say, my two brothers, went in, and all my gosh, everybody, every male almost, In fact, I have a brother that was 19 years older than me, and he even had to sign up. Oh. I mean, they were signing, 45, 48 years old. They was signing them up. Yeah, and in fact, I was in boot camp with a guy that was in his 40s, and the reason they took him, because he was a single guy, didn't have no family, nobody to care, and so he had no excuse not to go in. And I mean, it would kind of look funny to see this old guy in with us kids,
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've heard that, maybe Sliv, you remember, I've heard that in this area back in the 40s, if you were an able-bodied young man seen on the street and you weren't in uniform, you were kind of looked down upon.
Well, I would imagine.
What were you avoiding?
So. I would imagine so. Oh yeah, I'd imagine so. Yeah. People say, why isn't he? And my son's in, or
Some people had to be deferred, obviously, for critical war jobs.
Yeah, right.
Yep. So you get in the Marine Corps, and I understand you ended up in a pretty important place in World War II.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I can kind of tell you the story through it if you want me to.
Yes, that would be terrific.
I mean, after I trained after my boot camp, went down to Camp Pendleton and trained down there, and then we got on ship at San Diego, and we was headed, after we got out from shore, they told us that we was headed for Guam, because see, they were still fighting on Guam. So we were supposed to be what they called rear echelon, in other words, filled behind. And so anyway, we got off of Hawaii, someplace off of Hawaii, and they got radio communications that they didn't need us. So they dumped us off on the big island there, and we went up to camp. It was tent camp called Camp Tarawa, and we trained up there, and then boarded ship and went over in Pearl Harbor and sat there till the whole convoy got together, and so then we headed out. Of course, nobody told us where we was going, because they didn't tell me anything until we got out away from land. And they took us down in the war room there, and they had a big old map of Iwo Jima, and showed us all that they knew, and so then we went on, landed in Iwo Jima. Mm-hmm.
So how long was it before you realized the seriousness of where you were at and what was taking
place?
Right away. Okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We all the ships came in, and I can't remember exactly. I was third, fourth wave, I don't know, coming in, and already the beach was all kinds of destruction, of Higgins boats, and equipment, and dead, and the thing about it was, and we, some of the guys coming, the Davy Coxswain coming in with the Higgins boats, they didn't want to get too close because they thought they'd get stuck, because they was firing like mad. The Japs, they had us zeroed in, and so anyway, but the coxswain that was brought it right in on dry land. So we just they dropped the front of it, we just stepped right off of it. And but the one thing it went in, I suppose, about 25 yards, and it went up like this for, guys, I don't know, higher in the ceiling. And I mean, and of course, all the equipment we had on us, double pack, shovel, extra ammunition. We had, grenades, water canteen and everything. And it was all like sand, and you try to climb that, you take one up and slide down two, and I mean, it took everybody, maybe 5, 6, 10 minutes to finally get up on top of that.
That's about 15 feet probably.
It was, and I mean, everybody was kind of wore out one time we got up here because, it just, to get up on top there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you get over the cliff there, we'll call it a cliff, and so your unit's in action, and then there comes a time when there's something about a flag raising.
Yeah. The one group of Marines went to the north to get Mount Suribachi, and we went in about probably a mile, and then we turned south, and of course we knew that we knew beforehand that they, that as soon as they captured Mount Suribachi, which was supposed to have been the first day, that they would put a flag up, so we would know, that they'd captured it, and it would stop that fire. See, we was getting it from both, fire from both ways, and. So we waited till the 4th day before it finally, I think it was the 23rd. We had that land on the 19th. I think it was the 23rd, they finally, we seen the flag go up, and so we were really relieved, and it wasn't very long. It came back down, and we thought, uh-oh, the Japs has retaken, Mount Suribachi, and. So then a little later, then the one that was the famous flag, it went up,
Yeah, the famous picture that Sliv's talking about is the Iwo Jima picture. It's with the Marines raising the flag. It's become a Marine Corps icon.
Yeah,
very important. And that island was, if I believe I'm right, it's like 2.5 miles by 5 miles.
Right, yeah,
very small island.
Right.
And to be, the Earth is a big place, and to be on that concentrated small place during such an important event. Yeah. I mean, that's really something.
Yeah, I got, after I got home, I was home 3 or 4 years, and as I was telling Ron, and well, he's seen my book, and the Marine Corps sent me it's like a big geographer, has the whole battle, has everybody that was in the 5th Marine Division, and then it has all the lists of the killed, and and all the lists of that was wounded on there, and yeah.
Speaking of wounded, I understand that you were wounded.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that? Or?
Well, I was. And I mean, there wasn't a building on the island, and they bombed that, the B-29s bombed that. They said for a month beforehand. Of course, they knocked out, but all the Japs had already, they wouldn't, Mount Suribachi, they said was just nothing but caves and and even elevators in it, and of course caves all through the island, and. So, and we would stoop over to get ahead, and then we'd crawl on our bellies, because we was out in the open, both, and of course they had all the pill boxes, especially where that cliff was. I mean, they had that thing just loaded with pill boxes. But anyway, and we'd cross. There was 3 airports on the island, and that was the idea of the reason they wanted that island was because the B-29s and the B-24s that was coming from Saipan, and Guam, Henderson Field, it was bombing Japan. You know, a lot of them, you know, the gas tanks were shot or an engine was shot out or anything, you know, and they couldn't get back. They was landed, you know, in the ocean. And so being there was 2 completed airports, well, they were just, you know, just runways, you know, they would, you know, nothing fancy, that's for sure. And but anyway, you know, that was so that they could, you know, land, you know, come in, you know, and you know, at least have a safe landing. So yeah, so I went across the airports and like I was saying, that we got down to where I could see the ocean. We had them kind of pinned down in the corner, and what they was doing, they was as you know, as they pinched in, well, they would relieve a company, and so the one company was beside me. I was the end guy, and the company beside me went and pulled back too soon. So we had a gap in the line. So the sergeant said, Sliv, he said, you know, we got to make contact with the other outfit over there. And I could see them away in the distance. And so I told the guys, well, there was some recruits that come off the ship as backup, you know, that, you know, just, you know, scared to death, and, you know, like, of course I was too, but you know, and so I told them, you know, where I was going, you know, and I said, you know, if I don't come back, you know, notify the sergeant, you know, so, you know, they can come looking for me. And so I went across towards them, and I seen 2 guys in a ravine there, and so I went and started up that ravine, and I got hit, and I went down, and luckily, of course, you know, the corpsman, you know, was with the Marines, you know, Navy corpsman, you know, and I fell right in a Navy corpsman's lap almost, see, and so I just turned around, and here come another Marine that was probably their outfit that you know, that had a mortar, you know, a holder, you know, in his hand, you know, and I turned around, you know, with a tripod, you know, and I turned around and I said, he just got hit there, and wham, his mortar dropped, and he got hit in the arm here and dropped the mortar. So, and I laid there, and of course that corpsman, you know, he tore my pants down, you know, and you carry a patch, you know, your own kit with you, you know, and so they got that patch and put that sulfite or whatever it is on the wound, and then put that patch on, and so I laid there until it was after dark, and when they come up, and there was 4 guys. They come up after me in the stretcher, but there was only 3 got there, and the one, whether I don't know what happened, but there was something that he had to go back to, you know, and so they loaded me up and then took me back to battalion aid station. You know, it was just a big tent, and of course, see, they lit that island at night, you know, with flares, you know, and they kind of die down, you know, before another batch went up, and so that's when they'd run with me, you know, and when them flares would go up, they'd drop me. But so anyway, that's
Ron, you had mentioned that Sliv brought a few things with him today.
Yeah, this 25 caliber Japanese sniper bullet that hit him had to pass through a couple of items to get to Sliv. And he brought a little address book. The bullet went through that. The bullet went through his canteen, and a wad of money. Sliv's got an interesting story.
There's the address book.
You want to hold that up?
Yeah,
you can see right where the bullet went through that book.
I'll let you hold that up. That's.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can see right where the bullet passed through that book.
That was an address book, huh?
That was an address book. It was, with money wrapped around it.
Oh.
And it went through the money too, and my canteen, and then I throwed a bunch of that stuff in my canteen.
Bunch of shrapnel
in my head.
Yeah.
I got 5 pieces of it now.
Okay, so you still got part of the canteen?
Yeah, I got 5 pieces.
He's got
of it.
U.S. issue in his body.
Right.
Yeah, canteen.
I had a little funny story on that. Here a couple of years ago, my back, of course, still kills me, you know, and so my boy said, you know, I said, Dad, you ought to go to the chiropractor. And So I said, well, okay. So we went to Kirk. He knew him, and real well. And he said, I'm going to call him, and I want him to work on you. So anyway, I went, and Jim went with me, and so they took X-rays, of my hip, and so when he got them made, and he put them on the iPad or whatever it was there, and he said, "What's that?" and so I said, "Well, I can tell you what it is," and that about blew my son's mind.
Right. Oh.
And Kirk said he was telling every patient after that about that.
Oh.
What about that money that you had, Sliv? You had some of your own money, didn't you?
Yeah, I
had.
Yeah, I went and I had money wrapped around it, and I was telling Ron, I said, that's the one thing I wish that I'd done was kept that. But back then, I mean, $1 was $1, and I had a buddy that was over there, and like I say, I mean, for some reason, the billfolds was just disintegrating over there. I don't know whether it was from the sulfur or what, but anyway. So he handed me, he said, "Here, Sliv," he said, "take this and wrap it around your address book." And he said, with your money, and he said, if you get killed, I'll take it, and if I get killed, you can have it. See, so anyway, when I came back, and see, when you was paid over there, in Hawaii, your money had Hawaii written on it in light. It had Hawaii. It was printed in Hawaii, and so I had that, and I thought, well, I've got the address book. I mean, it's a memento, and so I decided, I'd go up to the bank and cash that in, and I did, and I wished I hadn't now, but I did.
He's got his dog tags there too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, there's my dog tags.
Look at that.
951-892.
Oh, look at that. That's something.
80 years ago on Iwo Jima, there they were.
Wow.
Yeah.
On a 19-year-old GI
Yeah.
Marine.
Yeah.
That's.
And I said something to them. I think what them.
Upside down. Yep.
Yeah.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah. You know what that is?
Explain to me what that is.
Okay. When we got discharged, the MPs and the shore police, the Navy shore police, they would be in bus stations and train stations, and if you didn't have your papers on you, they'd take you away, and I mean, it got to be such a hassle that they decided, that especially everybody was coming home at the same time. The trains were just full of military personnel, and so it was too much of a hassle for them, to check everybody out.
Yeah.
So the government just went and issued these, and you just put it on your on your uniform when you traveled, and once they seen that, they knew you had your papers and you was on your way home.
The ruptured duck, right?
The ruptured duck.
That's what that's called?
Yeah,
Okay.
ruptured duck. That's what they call it, the ruptured duck. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of coming back through Hawaii and coming back home, then what kind of turns to your life?
Well, after I was wounded, I went and the next day they put me on a C-47. You just had the open hull, and they had bars out, and they just hooking stretchers on that, and they flew me back to Henderson Air Force Base in Guam, and I went into I said I don't even knew the Army was around there, but an Army hospital. It was a big long Army tent, with just a canvas flooring in it, and so I was there, and I think for maybe a month or so, and my wounds, the reason it took so long, they wouldn't close it because there was so much crap in there, and about once a week I'd have to go down, and they'd put a long swab with cotton on it, and they would dip it in blood plasma, and they'd go in there and they'd work some of that stuff out of there, see, and so then they went on a troop ship then from Guam back to IE Heights overlooking Pearl Harbor, and they put us in officers' quarters and made them get down, with the peons, and they didn't like that very well. But anyway, so then I was in the hospital in IE Heights, overlooking Ford Island and Pearl Harbor, and then I went back went another ship back to San Diego or San Francisco. And I was in San Francisco in a hospital there just long enough, I think it was 5-6 days, that they got a hospital train together, and we had our own porters and everything, and we went clear across on train to Portsmouth, Virginia. And I think it took us, 4 days, because we pulled off on the siding because the war was still on, And we pulled off the siding to lead every freight train that there was go by, because they were hauling, war material. And so we got back here and went into a Confederate hospital that still had Lee's picture.
Oh, really?
And a bunch of generals, Lee's, generals on the walls.
Wow.
Yeah, and so then I was there, and so then. I was pretty much healed then, and I think they didn't know what to do with me, so, I come home on what they called an overseas leave of 30 days. Well, first I come home on what they called convalescent leave, and then went back, and then I come home on a overseas leave, so that was 60 days, and then I went back to the Navy Yard in Philadelphia, and I think it was 2 or 3 days, and they took us downtown and rode us up for our discharge. So then I come home, so that.
I see. So you get back home, and do you immediately end up back in Finley?
Yeah.
Come right back to Finley?
Yeah,
And just
back home, yeah.
Kind of just take off where you left off?
Yeah, right, just took off and,
What'd you
got
end
a girlfriend, got married, and
there you
had
go.
a couple of kids, and went to work at C.O. Duffield Motor Company, and I worked there 34 years. And
as a mechanic, right?
As a mechanic.
Yeah.
And worked on Chryslers, and and then in 1981, he was retiring, so he sold the place. So I went out to where Chrysler is now, although Mac Clevenger had it then, and I worked for Max for I don't know, 2 or 3 years until I retired. So that's about my life and my story.
He was an avid golfer up till very recently, too.
Yeah.
Very active as a golfer.
Yeah.
What was your best club, or what was your putting the best, or driving? What was the best part of your game?
I was just an average duffer, and there was 4 guys. We played for years together, the same 4 guys, and I got to be 96 years old, and I rode the cart the last 3 years. I walked all before that. And I rode the cart the last 3 years, and about the last couple of months, I think I was playing terrible. And normally these guys was all about 21, 22 years younger than I was, and I could keep up with them, but they beat me a couple, 3 strokes, And so anyway, I got decided, I'm done. So I never said anything to them, and it was September 15th, and I was 96. And I went and we got off number 9 green, and I said, "Well, fellas, that's it." And they said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I'm done." "Oh, hell, you'll be back, And I said, "No, I'm done." And I was. I never.
That was it. Huh?
That was it. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So you mentioned you were 96, then you're 98 now.
98. Mm-hmm.
So going back to the story of how we met, you coming into the office.
Mm-hmm.
And I seen you, and you were talking, and you had introduced yourself and said, "I'm 98, and I'm looking for some help retrieving some of my paperwork." And first of all, I thought, well, you're in great shape. You look wonderful for 98, getting around real well. And so, had you ever been to our office prior to that?
No, I never had been. No,
you never had been.
No.
Yeah. So Nicole was able to help you out that day with what you needed.
I hope
from
so.
the office.
I hope she was.
Yeah. And we were wondering, had you thought about all of those years that since you came back and started your civilian life as a mechanic, had you ever considered visiting the Hancock County Veteran Service Office?
No.
Because there's so many things out there,
Yeah.
and we'd like to get you back in there to let you know a lot of things that you've earned and that you're eligible for. And,
Well, yeah.
well, if nothing else, we'd like to get in there and talk with you. So
Yeah, okay.
We enjoyed talking with you.
Okay,
and
yeah.
hearing your stories.
Yeah,
And every discussion, I'm sure, will lead to more, things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did we miss anything, Ron?
I don't know. The members of the greatest generation, that's the way they are. You have to pry them into telling you what they need in a lot of cases. That's what I've found anyway. So Sliv is certainly a member of that, goes up his end of that generation.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, I appreciate Ron. I mean, he's a great guy. And
My dad was exactly the same age as Sliv.
And I couldn't believe, I mean, his dad's story. I knew that he was, it was, I mean, through France and all, and what Ron had been with and all. But when he was telling me here yesterday, I mean, my gosh, he said his dad was in the front lines, the longest of any.
272 days.
272 days.
In action.
Ended up all through France and through Germany and then into Czechoslovakia.
Ended up in Czechoslovakia. And then I saw the memoir that included your.
So you can imagine, I mean, what he done compared to what little bit I done,
Oh boy.
Oh, wow.
You took the bullet, though, Sliv.
Yeah.
I did want to say something to you, if it's okay, Ed. Nicole gave me that memoir that has your uncle Glenn Ball in
Oh,
there.
my grandpa.
Your grandfather.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
And I told you before here that I recognized the names of all those towns that Glenn was in that small period of time, and same experiences. And your grandfather was killed.
He was.
In France.
He was taken POW, and then a number of days later, he was strafed by our own planes.
By our own planes.
So,
Yeah, if there's anything you ever want to know about anybody that was in service from Hancock County, this guy knows everybody.
Okay.
We was talking yesterday, and I was telling him, about, I had a kid, a buddy that I went through school with, we were good friends, and he was in the Air Corps, and he got shot down, bombing Germany, and I went, and so Ron, he knew all about it. I mean, he knew who everybody was.
You have to appreciate your history.
Yeah.
I know you're interviewing 2 Marines after this, and I was reminded that General Vandegrift at Iwo Jima said the flag raising ensures that we will have a Marine Corps for another 500 years.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that is an awesome statement. But the number of people remaining alive that saw that flag raising has to be minimal.
Very minimal.
Minimal number.
Yeah.
So he is a piece of living history. Sliv is.
Absolutely. It's definitely an honor to interact and speak with you and hear your story. And
I'm just an average Joe.
I would say you're a little bit better than an average
He's
Joe.
above average
You're
Joe.
above average Joe. Right? Yeah. So, Sliv, what advice would you give to young Marines today, or even young people that are considering wanting to join the service in general?
Well, I would just think of the United States democracy, and try to bring it back where it used to be.
Oh, I see. Yep.
I mean, we're tearing ourselves apart, and I'm just afraid that one of these days we're going to be an authoritarian. I mean, we're not going to have a democracy the way people's thinking's now. I mean, I just hope the young people will realize, that what is going on, and try to do something about it.
Thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Sliv, the day of the flag raising there on Iwo Jima that you were there, do you remember about how many troops were on ground at that time during the flag raising? And
You mean over the whole island?
yeah, I would say, or even in the vicinity of the
Well,
flag.
I mean, I think I looking at my paper this morning in my book, and it said unit strength was 23,141, and there was total casualties was 8,770 that was killed and wounded.
Gotcha.
So it was around someplace around 40%, which
I see.
was the casualty rate.
Do you have any insight on those?
This is on a 4-mile square island.
No,
All
it's
these
5
casualties, all these deaths.
2.5 miles to narrowest part and 5 miles.
That was one of the highest death rates I think the Marine
Yeah.
Corps had.
Yeah,
in one area.
Yeah.
It was so concentrated.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You know, and Sliv, this is interesting. He said he went in the third or fourth wave. Well, General Kurobayashi, the Japanese general, was allowing us to land. So they would bunch up.
Right.
And it was exactly his plan, right, Sliv?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
they went in. It was quiet as
all of our guys.
It was quiet as to be. You know, to be is, you know, after they started landing, and then all of a sudden all hell broke loose. You know, I mean, yeah.
Our guys were bunched up, something terrible. And
Yeah, I think he committed Harry at the other end of the
did.
island. Yeah, him and a bunch of them. Yeah.
You would have been in on that, Sliv, if you hadn't been hit. Your unit was moving towards the end of the island that he was on.
You know, I mean, they was down to, you know, that and you know they drank sake, you know that rice beer, and what they do, they would put it on a string on a rock and put it down, you know, in a hole, or if there was a piece of tree that had been blown apart, they would take a rope and tie the necks down, you know, the two necks apart, and would hang it over that, you know. So and that's what was, as they was retreating. I mean, they and that's, I think that's, sometimes they like to fight at night, and you could hear them coming at night, and I think they get all buzzed up, and that was the idea of it.
Sure. And I think there were almost 20,000 Japanese defenders, and we captured 200 of them. The rest were all killed, which is incredible. And 3 of the guys held out for another. There were 3 Japanese on that island for 10 years.
Yeah, I know.
Hiding.
And the same thing, on Guam. I think Guam, was about 13 years later before the last one gave up.
Amazing. That's dedication. That's the enemy we were up against. They were diehards.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But our Marines were just a little better than they were, as always.
Good experience, and I'm glad I done it, but I wouldn't want to do it again.
Yeah, the number of World War II veterans is down to, like, out of the 13 million that served, it's down to about, well, you would know, it's probably 1.5%.
Is that right?
So to find a World War II veteran now is hard to do.
Yeah.
And that's when you got to soak them for information, because that first-hand information is about gone. And wouldn't you say Sliv has a pretty sharp memory? I mean, this guy is as sharp as anybody my age. Better looking too.
Yeah. No, that's one thing. I go out there. I'm taking chemotherapy now, and the one gal, gives blood test. Every time I go out there, and she'll say, how are you today? And I say, well, I'm pretty good. I said, no. I'm good, but I'm not pretty.
Ron, tell me about this hat you got on, General Patton's Third Army.
Well, let me say this. My dad was the same age Sliv was, graduated the same year, 1943, but my dad ended up on the other side of the planet in Europe with General Patton. And people love to say their father fought with General Patton. Well, Patton, essentially, by the end of World War II, had led probably 400,000 men into battle. The 7th Army in the Mediterranean, and the 3rd Army in Europe. My dad fought in Europe for 11 months, but I'm proud to say that Dad served. This was my dad's first boss, was General Patton. Dad saw Patton a couple times in battle, just running by asking. One time he stopped and asked one of Dad's buddies for directions. He was always racing up front with his Jeep, but that's why I brought up about your grandpa, Glenn, because, here's Sliv fighting in the Pacific, and we have a number of guys still in Europe, even in 1945. And that was, there were more casualties in 1945 than any other year of the war, which I still can't believe that. But we lost a number of men from this county in 1945, and Sliv could have been one of them, but he wasn't. But that's the story behind this hat. I just wanted to promote the 3rd Army a little bit.
There you go.
General Patton.
Yeah, but my gosh, for your dad to go all through France and Germany and in Czechoslovakia, and not get hit. You told me what his original company, 161 men, something like that. There's only 2 that wasn't
only 2 guys out of my dad's original company didn't get at least hit. 20% fatality, and the rest were hit. Some 2 times, some 3 times. One guy was hit 4 times. his lieutenant, when they were carrying him back, he said, "They can take this war and stick it. I've had it. You'll never see me up here again." So what did he do? He joined the Army for another 30 years.
Oh my!
I would have loved to have met that guy. That's my kind of GI.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, you mentioned your dad's experience and service. So you have an interest in the World War II and Korean eras. Can you tell me a bit about that?
The reason being, I'm 66 years old, baby boomers. You know, all the people born after World War II through the mid-60s, it seems like everybody I knew, their father had either served in World War II or Korea. Everybody's father. Some of the mothers too. And my dad was a history teacher. I was interested in that. And as it got into the 90s, realizing that these veterans were aging, I decided to start interviewing them and capturing their stories. So I interviewed about 60 World War II veterans. It took me 10 years to get all these stories written. And I took them down to the museum, and they printed those, and they can be purchased at the museum. I didn't do it as a money-making enterprise. I just wanted to save the history. And then they did a second volume, so there are probably 100 World War II stories that are preserved of local guys at the local museum. And then they had the idea of interviewing Korean vets. So, you know, that's the next generation. Those guys were a little bit younger. All of a sudden, the youngest Korea vets are 90.
Yeah.
So we interviewed about 40 of those Korean War veterans, and their stories are really,
Oh, well,
really
yeah, they had a
amazing,
tough
too.
time, I'll tell you.
That's a tough time.
Weather as much as anything.
Yep, absolutely. The name of that book is Ice and Fire.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
heat of the winter,
Yeah.
the freezing cold,
Yeah.
and we tried to highlight that. You've got two Marines that you're going to interview after this, and they face their own hell. You know, every war, there's nothing pretty anywhere, and nothing clean, and nothing that makes sense. You know, that's when a guy like Sliv comes back, or my dad comes back, and try to make sense of real life again. That's what I found from these veterans, and you're a veteran also. I mean, it's when you're back in the world, it's you got a different set of eyes, don't you?
Absolutely. And you know, we're so glad you interviewed all those World War II vets and Korean vets, and I'm going to go check some of those out.
That'd be great.
Especially since we've got our story walk coming up. We're doing 4 signs this year. Next year, our next 4 are beginning with the Vietnam War. So we're going to put some firsthand accounts, and I think maybe some of those interviews that you have could play into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but you know, thank you for people like you that go that extra mile to interview the veterans and get their stories out there.
They're intriguing, and you get the other stories off of. You get the Van Buren basketball and football stories. You got a guy that's 6'2", 140 pounds, that's playing defensive end on the football team. I'm like, what world was that, Sliv? He's got some great sports stories and some stories from the community too. Obviously, here I am, a non-veteran who admires veterans, sitting with 2 veterans, and Ed, you told us a little bit about your story, training drill instructors. I would love to hear something more about that.
Well, training with, initially I started out as a mechanic, then a driver, was in Iraq for 03, 04, 05, 06 as a fuel hauler, jet fuel. And when I came back from that, I got into the training realm, and I was attached to what they call the dirt trainers in the Army. We work at mob sites for any reservists and people that are mobbing up to go to war zones, and we'd train them for about 3 months, get them proficient in all their tasks, and sign off that this group's ready to go to a war zone. So I got to meet and train some very important people. And then after that, I got into a drill sergeant company in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was their training NCO. So I trained with the drill sergeants and set up a lot of the training, you know, the ranges, the logistics, some things like that, some of the courses that they were taking. I would put normal sergeants, staff sergeants, sergeant first class, get them into the drill sergeant academy and back. And I would coordinate the training at Fort Sill, Fort Knox, some at Fort Hood, some here locally in Indiana and Ohio. But it was an honor to be able to train troops and ensure that they were efficient and proficient enough to go to war zones around the world. So
So you really had an impact with these guys who are going off to their fields, their theaters of war, and training their troops. And
you always meet those people, and you always wonder, because sometimes they mow back through your station or not, and you always wonder how that group did, or this or that.
Sure.
Yeah. So
I'm sure they did well, Ed.
I'm sure they did well.
In the short time that I've met you here, I can tell what kind of a guy you are. Now, also, I was we talked about General Patton in the European theater, and I've heard that your grandfather, Glenn Ball, was in the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which was, everybody's seen the Band of Brothers and know about the paratroopers. So what about Glenn?
Yeah, he was in the thick of all that. He was on Chalk 31, and his jump number was 13, so he was 3113, right? My mother, growing up her whole life, she had been told that her dad never hit the ground, was killed on his way down. In 2004 or 2005, I can't remember exactly, she was at home and the phone rang, and she picked it up, and the guy on the other end said, is this Glenda? And she says, yes, it is. And the guy says, I've been looking for you for 60 years.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it started all that out because that guy on the other end of the line was with my grandpa in the same company and everything, and he was in the middle of writing a book. And so my mom got to meet him, and then they went down to Fort Benning for the 507th reunion and met a lot of other guys that were with Grandpa and got to learn the whole story. And it's just amazing how reaching out and kind of like you do, Ron, getting the veterans' stories and sharing them, making other families aware of, of what exactly happened to their veterans or loved ones. So, yeah, it's really important stuff.
I'm glad to hear you know the details. I am big on, if you have a relative who was in the military, know what branch they were in, know what unit they were in, know what their rank was. Don't just, I think he was Navy, I think it was, no specifics. It's important, don't you think, Ed?
Absolutely. I always thought of it, my grandpa passed away when he was 19, and I signed up when I was 19, so I always figured it as I'm continuing on.
Yeah, you just continuation. Yeah.
So
Sounds good.
I like that. Well, Sliv, we've heard from Ed, and we have a couple of young Marines here.
Yeah.
What else would you have to say to the younger generations trailing? You spoke earlier about addressing other Marines. What about young people in general, or thinking about military careers, or being the military part of their life?
Well, I mean, it'll make a man out of everybody. I mean, it gets into the service. I mean, it'll make you or break you. And I would highly recommend. I mean, in fact, everybody ought to have a little bit of discipline and training, and that would be a heck of a good way to do it, and I can imagine. I mean, and when you come out, it makes a better person out of you. That's the main thing. I mean, when you went through, some of this, then you realize, what life's all about, and what your role in it is. Yeah.
That's great. My wife's uncle was in the Army, and his wife was a Marine officer. That was an organized house. Mother's a Marine officer.
Oh, absolutely, I'll bet you.
Dad was a grunt.
Yeah.
So she outranked him, for one thing.
Yeah.
Both World War II veterans.
Yeah.
And they were on it in that house.
Well, okay. Again, Ron, thank you very much for all you do, and thank you for sitting on this podcast and sharing some of your stories and information. And it's much appreciated, not only here today, but within the veteran community and the Hancock County community. And we all appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you for your service, Ed.
Yep. And Sliv, thank you very much from the bottom of our heart here, and as American people.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome home.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for visiting us today, and for more stories just like this, please visit our podcast series, Our Veterans, Our Stories.